you and I both saw Sound of Freedom. We saw it independent of each other, but I got to tell you, it's always really rewarding that when a movie that is marketed more towards conservative Christians, let's say that's going to be the people in the seats, actually turns out to be a brilliant film. I thought that it was on its own. It's a great film. You know, it's a great film because the left are doing all this stuff, accusing people weirdly of being QAnon, which to young guys like me, I don't know, QAnon seems almost like the boomer sort of conservative thing. It's very strange to me, but it was a brilliant film, and it moved me very deeply because anything when it comes to the harm of children, we've seen this, of course, through this whole Pride Month with grooming, but just anything with children. I mean, they're so precious to the Lord. They're precious in our society. They are ostensibly innocent. We shield them, right, as protectors of children. And so to have a movie that goes in depth based on a true story, not every part accurate, but based on a true story about a very real problem that it is one of the fastest growing crimes, right? Child pornography. One of my old parish priests here in Colorado actually recently just pled guilty to the possession of child pornography. Okay, so this is something that very deeply directly affects me in that sort of way. So what was your reaction watching the film? Because there were so many moments that I was just filled with such sadness and also kind of like anger, like righteous indignation, if you will, which gets us to the main topic later, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah, no, it was going to a point you said. What's so good about this film is that let's be honest, most quote Christian films are absolutely cringe. They're just completely cringe. It's like most Christian music. Like it's knockoffs of secular stuff. And let's be honest, any knockoff of pretty much almost anything, 99 times out of 100, whether it's just going to suck, whether it's food or movies or music or whatever. Completely. It's terrible. And so, but whenever you have a good film like this, I think what made it's so good, aside from just the story, was the fact that the message that it pushed, it was very subtle. It's almost like a cherry on top or an afterthought or a reflection at the end, as opposed to like, accept this now, force this now, where you see this in a lot of modern films, like a lot of these woke films, they base the entire film off of something. Like I think the new Peter Pan, like they're changing the gender and the race of every character, but Captain Hook, of course, he has to be a white man. Of course. And so it's just like, okay, that sucks because you're clearly pushing an insane message very blatantly. But with Sound of Freedom, what my reactions were first 40 minutes, you just dive in. It's kind of no whole bar. You dive
off
in
to the races. Yes, sir.
And most of the time when I watch films that are just kind of like you dive in, that can be somewhat concerning on a writing portion because you're like, okay, you kind of have to lay the groundwork for all this stuff. But it was very good. And so the first 40 minutes, I honestly was just like, dang, this is hitting really hard. This is very deep. I kind of, it's like you want to cry because it's just so raw, I think, the way that they're portraying things, which is good. They're not showing things too much, right? Where you just like absolutely freak out, but they are still showing you a certain reality of the horrible nature of the trafficking industry. But then the remainder of the film, you're just like, let's go. Let's basically get revenge on this guy.
Yeah.
And let's just do what we got to do. And that's what was, and it's very satisfying. But what I thought was so interesting was, first off, I don't think I would have actually seen this film unless I saw all the buzz about it, because I just am not a person who goes to most modern movies. I love movies, but they're mainly old.
Right.
But what was so interesting about this to me was the fact that the same organizations that were promoting that horrible Netflix documentary, Cuties, and other just completely perverse stuff, were just freaking out on this, which it doesn't even have a very explicit Christian message.
Yeah, it's not particularly Christian or conservative outside of because it's very much like the elevated planes of don't mess with kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, aside from like the company who maybe makes it and like Caviezel, but then even like how many people who just go to a movie theater are really going to know those things?
Right.
You see them freaking out, and that's quite telling to me. And that's why, when we look at I think Trent Horn actually, people should go and watch Trent Horn's video on this specific subject of this film. He pointed out, it was very interesting, that there's been a long history of Hollywood and Disney who have been acting in a very predatory way, but very subtly as time has gone on, even going back for a long time. You see the promotion of even back in like the 60s and 70s, child actors who would have to wear very skimpy clothes, but then
Mm,
whenever you dig down into it, you realize like, oh, they're 14, they're 16, they're underage, they're very young. And these are in old films that you're like, oh, everything's kind of innocent back then. But
yeah,
the reality is like
still there.
they've been doing this for a while. But then when we see such a negative pushback, rightly in the schools and on media and things like that, this gets now lumped into it where we're starting to see for the first time, I think, the walls kind of come down, the mask be pulled off, and it's like, okay, there is a lot of attempts for money, for power to push this type of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, even just think of Balenciaga. What was it like 2 or 3 months ago? Like the open,
Yeah, the
basically
children, the
marketing.
BDSM, teddy bear, all
Yeah,
that kind
or
of
what was
stuff.
it? There was also that medical institution that it was like earlier this year they got in a lot of trouble because they said, "Oh, we accidentally put that pedophilia is a that people are born that
Oh
way."
yeah, minor attracted persons.
Yeah, like
Max.
all that stuff. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, this is not just typos. It's not like some guy on a computer just having too much fun and be like, "Hey, let's see if I
Right.
can get my company in trouble." It's that type of stuff goes to show you where we're at.
Yeah.
And it leads into actually, I think what we're going to talk about, because then it's kind of like, okay, in the olden days, what would have
Uh,
happened? In the olden days, they would have not put up with this.
so that's absolutely perfect. And I got to tell you that it's weird that we live in a world now where NBC, I think it was, put us in an article that says actually the chant "We're coming for your children" has been a long associated history of pride marches. And I'm like, they're not hiding it anymore. But it's so
Yeah.
surreal that now to take a stance on don't mess with children is a conservative position. That's
Mm-hmm.
weird to me, right? This supersedes everything. And watching Sound of Freedom, having what's happened with my parish priest, I'm reminded that these are such deep issues. I mean, these are obviously at the core of God's order. And the walls have come so loose that there are so many forces in the world that genuinely are pushing the sexualization of children. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we started out really slow, right? We started out a lot of, at least in Hollywood, it seems like with a lot of teenage romance films and teenage stars and that sort of thing, where, there are cultural elements that play there to determine those sorts of ages sometimes. But now it's younger, right? You talked about cuties coming out. It's getting wild. And it's amazing that this is now a stance you have to take. This is a public stance, right? I don't want my children to be groomed. And now to see a movie, a very uncomfortable movie, right? And you're right, it doesn't have a clear-cut message. This isn't something that like, oh, it's Jim Caviezel and it's Angel Film and we know what we're gonna get. It's like, no, this is one of those movies that if it was a different time, it was shelved for 5 years. It was supposed to be, I think, distributed by Disney originally, and of course,
Yeah,
Disney
yeah.
shelved it.
Mm-hmm.